my stars, welcome back to my channel. I'm Basil, and today I will be reading the final part of Not So Much a Lie as an Omission of Truth by Tiger Lily 26 on AO3. Let's get right into it. Izuku didn't come to them in words, but he seemed to appreciate the extra attention and settled a bit over the next few days. It seemed like he was doing better, and that was all he and Nato could really hope for. While things were getting better on the Izuku front, they were looking worse on the Takiri front. The villain had been leaving increasingly forward with their threats, mentioning that they tracked the neighborhood Takiri was in, and a few days later, the building. Dabi had even been concerned enough to reach out to try and convince them to accept some protection that morning. They'd turn it down. It was a few hours later, and Nato was out on patrol when Hitoshi got a ping on his computer. Takiri was contacting him through his emergency contact rather than the usual business one. He clicked on the message. Takiri, I need help. Being followed. Hiding here. Attached. The attachment was an address, a familiar one at that. He sent a quick affirmative to Takiri, grabbed his capture weapon, and ran for the door. Dabi, heading to pick up Takiri. Information on my computer. He could barely make out an affirmative before he was out the door. A moment later, his con crackled to life. A little more warning would be nice, asshole. Dabi grumbled. Hitoshi rolled his eyes and jolted around the corner. Kind of on a time limit here. Whatever, you know the drill. Call me if you need backup. Will do. And with that, Hitoshi continued sprinting to the familiar location and arrived within minutes. He felt odd stopping at the small cafe in his hero uniform. Whenever he came with his boyfriends, he was usually dressed a bit more casually. Hitoshi approached carefully, keeping an eye out for the villain. He didn't see any sign of them, but that doesn't mean they weren't nearby. Entering the cafe, the small bell above the door gave a small ring, and the barista looked at him curiously. Yeah, he definitely stood out in his hero uniform. He gave them an awkward wave and looked around. Tucked into a corner booth was a small figure, hunched under a gray hoodie. Considering there was no one else here, and that had to be Takiri. He approached slowly, sliding into the booth. They flinched as he did. Takiri, he asked. They gave a quick nod. Hitoshi glanced around again, still clear. Do I get a face to put with the name? They seemed to hesitate for a moment, but eventually they reached up and pulled down the hood. The first thing he saw was green hair. Very familiar green hair. Izuku? He hissed. Scooting a lot closer, his boyfriend peered up at him through his curls, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Hi, Hitoshi. The asshole had the audacity to wave at him. Okay, so, Izuku was Takiri, the informant who had some of the best quirk analysis anyone had ever. Oh, yeah, okay. He was definitely connecting some dots now. Izuku had mentioned wanting to be a hero, and with his current job, it probably wasn't too hard to find a call that some agency had put out for some advice. From there, knowing Izuku, he had probably found a taste for being an informant and stuck with it. This would also explain why Izuku had been so off a few days ago. He'd just found out he was in danger and couldn't tell them without admitting he was their analyst. Why their boyfriend didn't tell them in the first place, he wasn't sure. That wasn't important right now, though. He had to get him somewhere safer. Izuku wasn't looking at him anymore. Instead, his eyes were trained on his lap. Yeah, that wasn't going to cut it. He pulled Izuku into his side. Hitoshi! Are you okay? He stared for a moment, tears welling in his eyes. Yeah, I'm okay. I don't know why I didn't just come clean when I found out someone was after me. When I noticed someone following me, I didn't know what to do. Izuku leaned into the hug. You did the right thing, Hitoshi said, finding somewhere safe and contacting me. A nod. Are you mad? He thought for a moment. Nah, just a little surprised. Hitoshi was a little upset that Izuku felt he couldn't share this with him or Nato, but he wasn't mad. They sat there for a moment as Hitoshi continued scanning. He didn't see anyone that matched the villain's description, but that was no reason to let his guard down. What now? Oh, right. He had a job to do. I'll need to take you back to the agency. Izuku's eyes lit up. I get to see your agency? Since it was an underground agency, they had rules against civilians visiting. That meant the only people who really stopped by were Hawks, Todoroki, and a few other heroes who knew their co-workers. Erasers also stopped by 4 times, but it's not like Hitoshi was keeping track or anything. Yes. At the confirmation, Izuku practically vibrated with excitement, despite the fact he was currently being hunted by a villain wanting revenge. They would have to talk about that later. Nato was going to be surprised. He tapped his comm. Dabby, you there? Static. Yeah, on standby. Good. I have the Kiri, and I'll be bringing him back to the agency. As a second thought, he added, no sign of the villain. Got that. Phantom Thief is back from patrol. Then he will be here to greet you. See you soon. Got that. Phantom Thief is back from patrol and will be here to greet you. See you soon. The comm clicked off. While Hitoshi knew he took the news of his boyfriend being an informant fairly well, he had a feeling Nato wouldn't. His other boyfriend had a protective streak a mile wide. After they became friends, Nato had been on the lookout for months just in case his class wasn't treating him right. No matter how many times Hitoshi reassured him they weren't bad, he just couldn't let his guard down for the longest time. He foresaw playing Mediturn in his near future. He foresaw playing Mediator in his near future. Sighing, Hitoshi pushed himself up. Let's get heading out. We don't want to stay here too long. Izuku got up too, looking a lot better than when he had pulled off his hood. If he only knew what would probably happen the second they walked into the agency. Getting back to the agency took a bit longer than getting to the cafe. Hitoshi led them down a few back streets, wanting to make sure they weren't being followed. Eventually, though, they pulled up in front of a nondescript office building. The only tip that there was anything different about it was the reflective windows that prevented passers-by from looking in. Izuku raised an eyebrow as they entered through a door in the back. He couldn't exactly walk in the front in full costume, especially in broad daylight. Hitoshi led him up to the second floor, ignoring the glances his coworkers were trying to catch of Izuku. By now, most people probably knew he was bringing in their elusive informant, and they were trying to get a good look at him. It was clear that one or two recognized Izuku from the picture on Nato's desk, as they did a double take. Yeah, when they could all go home, they were going to have a very serious conversation about what counted as information they should share in their relationship. When they finally reached the door, Hitoshi turned to face Izuku, who was taking in everything with wide eyes. Is this where your office is? He asked, vibrating and shaking his hands in excitement. Hitoshi tried to resist his boyfriend's cuteness and focus on the task at hand. It is. Nate, Phantom Thief, should already be in there, so. He trailed off. Izuku's eyes widened, understanding what was being left unsaid. Oh, Izuku said, losing a bit of his excitement. Yeah, but you do get to meet Dabi, which is probably a plus for you. Izuku tried to smile, but it turned out to be more of a grimace. Well, best to stop avoiding the inevitable. He opened the door and they walked in. Dabi leaned back in his chair and greeted them with a wave. But when he finally seemed to register Izuku's face, his eyes widened comically. Nato liked to brag. Ignore the fact that Hitoshi enjoyed it. And so Izuku's picture had been shown around the office a few times, and to anyone from Class A when they stopped by, since for some reason Izuku never wanted to go to their meetups. He did go to the Class B once, though. He could ask about that later. Dabi slipped his phone out of his pocket and was clearly texting someone. Dabi looked at him before typing faster. Sorry, I know you two live off of my boyfriend's drama, and it's my turn to get back. I wouldn't count laughing at him flying into window as living off his drama. Hitoshi failed to snatch his phone. Izuku was still standing by the entrance, and Dabi tossed him a smile. Hey, put that away, asshole. He's clearly slacking on his training if he can't grab my phone. Keep him in line, will ya? He looked confused but nodded. The door to the print room opened, and Nato walked into the office. Is Siren back with the cure yet? We have a lot of paper. Nato looked up and froze, eyes falling on Izuku and then looking to Hitoshi. He set the papers on his own desk and moved to Izuku. Nato held him by his shoulders and pressed a kiss to his cheek. Not that I don't like surprises, but Izuku's not allowed to be here, he said, turning to Hitoshi before he looked back to Izuku. Mind telling me why you're here? When our boyfriend is supposed to be bringing someone in? Izuku fiddled with his hands a bit before settling on loosely grabbing Nato's arm. Well, he tried, turning to Hitoshi for help. Nato seemed to freeze. Siren? He said coldly, Where's the Curie? There was no sugarcoating it. Right in front of you. Izuku picked up a new hobby. It sounded weak, even to his ears. Truthfully, he had wished Izuku had let them in on his decision to freelance for hero agencies. It was dangerous, and they could have helped him to go through safer channels. Instead, they were where they were now. Izuku! Nato's face gave away nothing, which was so different from how he normally was. Nato could communicate everything with his expressions alone if he wanted to. It was almost eerie how blank his face was. Izuku was still holding onto his arms. I'm Dakiri. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but I'm not sorry I did. He held Nato's gaze. Nato let his hands fall away from Izuku's shoulders. What were you thinking? It was less accusatory and more genuine questioning. Hitoshi moved to Nato's side, setting his hand on his back. Let's talk about this later, okay? We should focus on making sure he's safe. Nato clenched his jaw. That's the thing. He wasn't safe because he didn't tell us about this. We could have helped him. His voice was starting to raise. Nato! Izuku stood his ground, but he was tearing up a bit. I should have told you to, but I didn't want you to worry about me. Now Hitoshi just felt frustrated. Izuku, of course we're going to worry about you. We love you. How many times would they have to make it clear that knowing what Izuku was dealing with wouldn't be a detriment to them? They wanted to help him. They wanted to know when he succeeded and when he needed support. It's just, I don't want to be a burden to you. You both do so much for me already, and I swear, if you were going to say something else self-deprecating there, you're not a burden. Nato finished quietly. Izuku just stood there, looking at them, like what they were saying was totally incomprehensible. How could they never notice how bad it was? The scrape of a chair. Dobby walked over and wormed his way between them. He stuck out his hand. I hate to break this up, you three, but we have work to do. Nice to meet you in person, Dakuri. I'm Dabi. Izuku seemed stunned but still took his hands. Nice to meet you, too. And feel free to call me Midoriya. The secret's kind of out. Well, Midoriya, thanks for the advice on upgrading my support gear. Things are running a lot more smoothly now. While they talked, Hitoshi slipped his hand into Nato's and gave a squeeze. They both needed it right now. After a few minutes of Dabi and Izuku chatting, Hitoshi realized he'd probably have to thank him later for intervening. Nato and Hitoshi probably would have kept pushing, and Izuku just would have gotten upset with himself. Of course, they knew Izuku didn't have the best self-esteem after dating him for so long, but he didn't think either of them expected it to go this far. Dabi stepping in gave them all a chance to breathe. Eventually, they had to actually get to work, and with Izuku's help, they somehow managed to track down the villain that had been after him. How they found him so fast, Hitoshi wasn't entirely sure. They let Izuku have the computer for 2 seconds, and when they looked back, he had visuals on the escaped villain who was still near the cafe. They sent one of the other heroes at their agency to round up the villain. And once Hitoshi received the word they were in police custody, Dabi shooed them off to go home. Needless to say, the drive back was awkward and silent. Hitoshi had no idea how to broach anything they needed to talk about. He didn't exactly have the best people skills. That was part of why he chose underground heroics to begin with. When they walked in the front door, Izuku had a set look on his face. "You two go sit down. I'm going to make us some tea." Yeah, this probably was a tea kind of talk. Nato went and sat down. Hitoshi gave Izuku what he hoped was an encouraging smile before following. Nato didn't look at him, bouncing slightly when Hitoshi sat on the same cushion. Nato folded himself into Hitoshi's side, wrapping his arms around his waist a moment later. He knew the feeling. They sat in silence until Izuku brought them each a cup of tea. I want to talk about this, but I don't know where to start." Nato shifted a bit so he could face Izuku, while still being squished into Hitoshi's side. "The beginning's fine." "Okay, well, I saw an open call from an agency for analysis, and it looked like something I could help with." He bit his lip. "But you two know how hard it was for me to find my current job. It was so hard to find a place that would take on someone quirkless for an internship. I figured if they knew who I was, they wouldn't want my help. So I decided to use a pseudonym to make sure they took me seriously," he said, face filled with determination. The same determination that they fell in love with. "Why Dakuri?" Hitoshi found himself asking. Izuku drooped a bit. "Well, it's kind of similar to something people used to call me at school, and I wanted to change it. Make it a 'you can do it' instead of a 'I can.'" "Like with what we did with our hero names?" Nato clarified. "Exactly," he said, snapping his fingers. "They took my advice and called the villain, but then they recommended me to others. I didn't want to turn anyone away when I could help them, so I just kept up with it. I didn't exactly mean to make a name for myself, but then I did, and then Dawi asked me for help, and then you did. It all spiraled out of control." "You said earlier you didn't tell us because you don't want to be a burden." Nato's voice was lanced with pain. "Do you really believe you're a burden to us?" When Izuku sniffled, Hitoshi's heart broke. Nato sat up, setting his and Izuku's tea aside so that he could pull him down into them. Hitoshi just needed to give him some sort of comfort. He wrapped his arms around Nato and managed to get them partially around Izuku as well. A small sob. "It's just, you're both so great, and I'm just me." Nato pressed his face into Izuku's curls. "We both love you so much. You're our amazing genius boyfriend." "You're so caring," Hitoshi added in, also feeling choked up. "You listen to us. You make sure to call your mom at least once a week so she doesn't worry. And you also take cases for less than it's worth if it's for a low-income family." Izuku hiccuped. "I love you too." The tea was cold by the time they all calmed down. Does this mean I should stop working for hero agencies? They both startled. Of course not, Nato said, sounding a lot more like himself. You're amazing, and everyone needs to know it. Just, we can help you be a little safer from about it now. Izuku nodded seriously. Hitoshi took a breath, planning on tanking the mood a bit. Would you maybe consider talking to someone? Their smaller boyfriend tilted his head in a way that looked borderline painful to get a look at Hitoshi. Like a therapist? Yeah, I saw one at UA when I was a student, and it helped me to not see the worst in people. Like, worry all the time about what they thought of me, be more confident in myself and stuff. He shrugged. It's not like a magical cure at all, but maybe it would help. I think I would like to try. Izuku gave him a smile. A bit of help would be nice. Nato pressed a kiss to Izuku's lips, and then leaned back to give one to Hitoshi. It was a soft press of the lips, lingering as his chest filled with and electricity shot to his toes. He broke away a second later. They took the next hour to relax, trying to shake off the day. They did have to shift eventually, because with 3 people on the couch, limbs were bound to go numb. Nato sighed. So, neither of you have any more giant secrets, right? Hitoshi chuckled, but stopped when he realized Izuku wasn't laughing. Izuku? Hitoshi prodded. He gulped. Remember how I haven't gone to any of your class meetups, Hitoshi? Hitoshi nodded, not liking where this was going. Well, I might know one of your classmates, and he doesn't exactly like me. Nato sat up a bit more. What do you mean by that, Izuku? Bakugo and I may or may not have been childhood friends. With the story that followed, Nato and Hitoshi came to a silent agreement to make Bakugo's night hell at the next meetup. But for now, Nato scrambled around for the TV remote, turning on the first All Might movie. They weren't the biggest fans, but it was Izuku's favorite, and that was what mattered. Alright, my stars, that is the end of the whole thing. I really hope you enjoyed it. I can say for sure that I did. This is my second time reading it, of course, but I can never get tired of it. It's such a nice one. Again, if you guys haven't, go to Tiger Lily and go Kudo's fic. It's a great fic. But yeah, I really like the trope of Izuku being a secret vigilante. That always gets me. So, if you guys have any recommendations for fics you would like me to read, you can always put them down in the comments below. And I hope to see you in the next one, my stars. Please take care of yourselves. My socials and Discord server are down in the description below, so please go check it out. And I will see you in the next one. Bye, my stars.